will be recorded and captioned. The archive event will be available on the Region 2 website in the coming weeks. You should be hearing audio through your computer speakers, so please ensure the volume is turned up so you may hear the proceedings accordingly. We will have a question and answer session after the presentation concludes. You'll see a Q&A pod in the lower left-hand corner. Please feel free to submit your questions about the subject matter there, and we'll do our best to answer them. And finally, in the top right corner, we ask that if you'd like to receive news updates from Region 2, you can enter your email address and we'll be sure to add you to the distribution list. With that, I'll turn it over to Devin Cairns, our Individual and Community Preparedness Officer with FEMA Region 2, to introduce our speaker and today's proceedings.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everybody who's joining us today. As Sarah said, my name is Devin Cairns. I'm the Individual and Community Preparedness Officer for Region 2. So myself and our team, we're charged with strengthening preparedness across New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. We've been doing these monthly webinars for approximately 2 years now, and I'm very excited about this month's presentation. I'd like to introduce our speaker, and I want to make sure I have my notes correctly here because there's a lot of acronyms that I'm not too familiar with, but I do want to share those. Chief Joseph Meyers is the Chief Inspector for the Fire Department of New York's Explosives Unit, overseeing all high explosives for commercial blasting, explosives escorts, ammunition, pyrotechnics, and fireworks in New York City. Major projects under Chief Meyers include Macy's 4th of July, Times Square New Year's Eve, the Kosciuszko, I'm probably butchering that one, Kosciuszko Bridge demolition, and over 4,000 pyrotechnic permits per year. Chief Meyers has served as a general foreman for major NYC explosive projects, including the Port Authority Bus Terminal, 7-line extension, and the World Trade Center. He is a national certified fire inspector, licensed pyrotechnician, and commercial blaster in several states. He's a member of the ISEE, the IABTI, and the IAAI, and a graduate of Pace University with a degree in business. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Meyers.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to concentrate on fireworks displays. We just concluded the Macy show. So we're going to kind of walk through some fireworks safety. And just a quick note, I was a commercial blaster. I did explosives for a living prior to coming to the New York City Fire Department Explosives Unit. All right. The first thing is every fireworks is dangerous. Doesn't matter. It's got to be used by professionals and must be in the right hands. Even sparklers, as you could see by this slide, are dangerous if they're not disposed of correctly. And most of the accidents we see here are usually minor effects, which could be a candle, a sparkler, believe it or not. So we've had a lot of issues with some minor effects, and especially since New York State has legalized the safe and sane fireworks. It's very easy to come from Yonkers to the Bronx. All right, we're going to go into display fireworks. Now, display fireworks is defined in 1123. If you're not familiar with the designations, 1.3 is display fireworks. The consumer-grade fireworks you would see in Pennsylvania or states that sell consumer fireworks would be a 1.4. There's also designations which is on the packaging. There's United Nations code or UN codes which designate whether they're 1.3 or 1.4. So if it's a UN 0335, it would be a 1.3, and UN 0336 would be a 1.4. So the definition of a display firework is a large firework device that explosive materials intended for use in fireworks displays and designed to produce a visible or audible effects by combustion, deflagration, which is the speed of sound, or under the speed of sound, which is usually somewhere, depending on the atmosphere, it's going to change between 1,100 feet per second to 1,200 feet per second, and it could go even vary more than that. And it's also a heaving effect. If fireworks go off in a building, it would be more of a deflagration. It would be a heaving. It would heave the roof off, where a detonation which is high explosives, which can go anywhere up to almost 30,000 feet per second or more. Those are more of a shattering and fragmenting effect. All right, so if you go to the next slide, we got the shells. Now, in New York City, 12-inch shells are considered very high explosives of 1.1, which would be classified, which dynamite is classified as, or the high explosives you see in commercial blasting, anything above a 12-inch shell. You have the smaller shells, which can do a tremendous amount of damage. We have a tremendous amount of shows here in New York. Most of our average barge shows are 1 to 2 barges of anywhere from 100 to over 200 feet. And the Macy show has 4 barges, and those barges are usually around 300 feet. The shells can do tremendous damage, and like I said, we've had the accidents in the past, many years ago, so we've corrected that, and in the fire code, we do address those. Because as I always tell everybody, the fire code's written not in ink, but in blood. It's happened. A 12-inch shell will blow a nice big hole in a barge, a steel barge. Okay, so what is in the shell? You got you got a lift charge, and you got a burst charge. There could be multiple burst charges, but to break it down and keep it simple, you have what is quick match. Now these shells fire electronically. A lot of consumers make the mistake, and it's happened, where they'll buy a box that says electric fire only, and if you light that with a hand flare, it'll go up immediately right in your face. So you got to be real careful. You got to read the warning labels. You got to read the boxes and make sure you're using the right product. I don't recommend anybody use it at their house, because anything's safe in the right hands with the professionals using it. So just to give you an idea, you got the quick match, which is what you're lighting. That's the end you're lighting. You got the stars, which is part of the burst charge, and you got a time delay fuse, because in the mortar tube, that lift charge is going to go first, and once that mortar is lifted out of the tube, that time delay is going to go up once it reaches the altitude or prescribed height it's going to be at. All right, then we have, now also the mortar tubes are designed specifically for the shell size. You have to have the right height and diameter, obviously. All right, then we go into the DOT classifications. So you have division 1.1 to 1.6. 1.1 being the most dangerous explosives, which is the high explosives, which is dynamite, which is most people are familiar with. There are many variations nowadays, emulsions, slurries. There are different types of high explosives. So, and then the subclass, which is G. So you see those diamond signs with 1.1, the orange signs, and then if you see the G under it, that's a pyrotechnic type explosive. S would be a special item. An example of a special item, which is it's not new to the market, but the technology has caught up, so it's being used. The common term would be rock breakers, which is actually a pyrotechnic device that is used to either break boulders up, move rock in blasting operations. It's a combination of ammonium nitrate and nitrocellulose. So if you see the next slide where you got the 1.3, all right, so 1.3, explosives that present a fire hazard in either a minor blast hazard or a minor projection hazard or both, but not a mass explosion hazard. Examples of that would be display fireworks, smoke grenades, and flares. Now display fireworks, I'll just go over that again. Those are what the professionals use. Those are not consumer grade, which you can buy on the shelf. Smoke grenades have been legalized in some states. They're used in mostly paintball games, but they must be soaked for 48 hours. A lot of the products, it's not so much you could have the danger of them firing when they're not supposed to be. You also have the danger of being disposed of improperly, which causes many, many fires. Flares too, same thing. Now also, don't forget one thing about the explosives. The more it's confined, it may be a minor blast hazard or a minor projection hazard, but once it's confined, it could be potentially a mass explosion hazard. 1.4 is what you commonly see as pyrotechnics. You would see that in a stadium. If a band was playing in Madison Square Garden or Barclays Center, any venue, Typically, it's what they call 1.4, which is not as hazardous as 1.3, doesn't contain as much product, black powder, but it is also obviously very dangerous. NFPA gives you usually a safety zone of a minimum of 15 feet. Now, just so everybody knows, I'll just go off on a little tangent. We never go under what the ATF recommends, or 1126. As far as distances, we may exceed it. So, for example, in NFPA, the distance for 1 inch of shell size would be 100 feet per inch. 70 feet per inch. In New York City, we bumped that up to 100 feet per inch. So, a 10-inch shell, you would technically need 1,000 feet of a safety zone, minimum. Then we have examples like we went over the G, and then you have, which is an S, which is proximate pyro, small arms ammo, and like I said, that rock-breaking product. That's special products. So the consumer fireworks and proximate pyrotechnics would be a G, 1.4 G. Proximate pyro, you have proximate pyro, close proximate pyro. Then you get into the 1.1, which is the high explosives, the explosives that prevent a mass explosion hazard. Examples of that is flash powder. The main problem with flash powder, it's extremely sensitive. Even in disposal techniques with it, when you're down on the range and you're doing EOD work, explosives ordnance disposal, to dispose of flash powder is extremely, extremely dangerous. It is in bulk salute shells. That's why you got to be careful when you use those. And also some large display fireworks. The only, with the flash powder, the new generation of fireworks are always experimenting, and they got different types of designs. Like some of them have, if you look at some Italian shells, they're actually packaged in plastic that is supposed to last 10 years. You also have some of the devices are using cornstarch or other type of dust, which basically ignites. As everybody knows, dust fires are very dangerous. So some new different techniques being used out there and different types of products, but they're all very dangerous and have to be used by the professional. And the main problems we see, especially with fireworks, is they're not stored correctly. So they must be stored in an environment that is not very humid. It must be stored with either a desiccant powder or packaging or some type of dehumidifier. Because once you have any type of moisture in a product, and that's what we find when we do any investigation into product failure, or if it didn't function as designed, it was old product, whether what we call low break, where the product lifted out of the mortar tube and was set off prior to its designed height. So that usually is moisture in there. So they must be kept properly, and usually the standard number, if it's kept correctly, would be a shelf life of 3 years. If you see product that's 9 years old, 10 years, you could pretty much be sure it's not going to function as designed. Now we're going to get into a little bit of the show itself. So we're at the, when you do the show, this is the average show. Macy's show is a little bit different because it's a huge undertaking with many partners involved and many different agencies. We have the first one is the operator. The operator is a person with the overall responsibility for the operation and safety of a fireworks display. So the company representative who's in charge, their lead operator, who basically is what you want to call them by different names, is the foreman, the operator. It's the same. The jurisdiction ultimately has a responsibility, but we're basically an extra set of eyes and ears, and to make sure that they're doing the right thing and correct anything that we see that may be unsafe. The shooter, you may have multiple shooters, like on Macy's, just on the bridge alone there was 5 shooters on the Brooklyn Bridge this year. We had 4 barges south of the Brooklyn Bridge. We had the Brooklyn Bridge itself, which was done in 2014, but not to the scale it was done this year because there was construction on the bridge, and they have travelers underneath which were not accessible. So this year there were approximately 25,000 devices on that bridge. So the shooter is going to stand, because you're going to have the main operational command, which is going to be where the computer is going to be with the music, if it's time to music the show. Now the individual shooters are going to be by their modules, which are on the bridge. So the Brooklyn Bridge had 5 shooters. And just the definition is a member of the fireworks group performs the actual ignition of the fireworks devices. A spotter, which we also use, we have our own fire department personnel, inspectors out there, is a member of the fireworks crew, observes the firing and bursting of devices for the purpose of detecting proper angles, duds, and hazardous conditions. So, for example, we did the Macy show. You had a small footprint, and that's a very narrow section of the bridge, and we have a lot of piers there. So the fire department, the pyrotechnicians are responsible for the barge itself. They're responsible for the bridge itself, but any residual shoreline that is patrolled and policed, and what we call spotters are actually FDNY explosives unit personnel. Then we go into approximate audience, which is audience closer to pyrotechnic device and allowed by NFPA 1123. So that would be like indoor pyrotechnic devices, which I said there's usually a safety zone, a minimum of 15 feet. And again, I stress, if you know your business and know your products, you can adjust the product to fit. Sometimes you need a smaller footprint inside a venue or inside a one I could particularly remember was Alice Cooper does a waterfall. So they were doing Fox and Friends, and he normally does a device which they had the 15 feet, but because of the small footprint they had there, they weren't able to attain that 15 feet safety distance. So by tweaking the product and putting fire guards in certain positions, we were able to narrow that distance down to about 10 feet. Okay, so we're going to move on now. Very important, paperwork, very important, and the right paperwork. So this is our instructions for a permit application for the display of fireworks. In New York City, in our jurisdiction, which is the 5 boroughs, we escort, which we're going to get into later. We actually escort any explosives, whether they're transiting our jurisdiction or the show is intended, the products are intended for our jurisdiction. The minute they enter our city line, they are escorted by usually an engine company, and depending what it is, one of our vehicles, the explosives unit vehicles. We do not take our eyes off the product from the minute it arrives to the minute it leaves. So for example, it's for a show. We'll pick it up at the city line, escort it directly to whether it's going to a pier for loading, a beach, or Central Park, and then our people will stay, our team will stay with that, monitor all the loading completely. Until the show is fired, the cool down period is over. The product, if there is product left over, is either repackaged, shot. When I say shoot it, you can shoot it. You have the option here to shoot the show, what's left over, or to repackage it and bring it back to either the loading location at the pier and then remove from the jurisdiction. And that is under our surveillance from the time it arrives here to the time it leaves our jurisdiction. All right, so you can read through this this checklist. It's a little different for water shows than it is for land shows. FAA usually is a notice to airmen, anything over 300 feet, whether it's pyrotechnics 1.4 or true fireworks 1.3. And the ATF clearance. Everything's in common is a little bit different. Coast Guard notification, same thing. Coast Guard does not issue permits for most shows. The only time they will issue a permit is when it affects marine traffic. For example, the Macy show. We have a entire zone locked down. No vessels can enter that zone. Important, very important. We're going to get into the site plan. A site plan is usually most people use a Google Earth map, and they'll give us the layout, the distances, the longitude, latitude, and so on. And you got to have the discharge site where the spectators are, parking areas, buildings, streets, bridges and infrastructure, piers, etc., within 1,500 feet. Because like I said, if you use larger shells, you may want a larger distance, but in New York, the maximum they could use is 10 inches, which if you go by our code is 100 feet per inch, would be 1,000 feet. So we want to know what's going to be in 1,500 feet. Obviously, the fireworks are designed to go a certain height and a certain spread, but wind, atmosphere changes can affect that. We want to know the fallout areas. All the separation distances, elevations greater than 25 feet above the ground. We don't let them, some people do, mortars angle for aesthetic effect. The only time we will let them angle a mortar normally, especially on a land show, is to adjust for wind direction and wind speed. And any overhead obstructions within 1,000 feet. So the site plan is very important. Most of this stuff, the important part is in the prep work and all the preparation for this, because as we know, we get no second chances in explosives. Once it goes, it goes. So you must do everything in your power to make sure that the job is done 100% and you don't leave any stones unturned. All right, so the permit site plan on shore. We got the location of any buried utilities. We don't really dig here in New York if it's Central Park and the beach, but if you do, the operators must consult with the sponsor and dig safe, which is the utility companies, make sure they're not going to hit any power lines, which has happened. Offshore, discharge by reference of shorelines and the layout of the barge. Our barge shows here, we make them they're not allowed to use a wooden shanty. They use a steel sea container where the pyros are when they are firing. We do have a distance, usually a minimum of 50 feet from the sea container. Most shells we do here are usually between 4 and 10 inch. Now just a quick note on that, 8 inch, 10 inch, they must be in 55-gallon drums, a proper type of drum, not a garbage can you buy it at the store, filled with sand, and one mortar tube per 55-gallon drum. There are some other ways to do it, but that's the most common way, especially off a barge, offshore. Inventory, super important. ATF, especially with any explosive, high explosive. The permit must list the number of shells, the size of shells, the type of shell, and the U.S. DOT EX numbers, UN numbers. The EX number is just basically when that actual product was first approved. Doesn't necessarily mean it was manufactured when the date on that EX number, but it's when that actual product was approved by DOT. Another thing on inventory is you must mark the boxes. We've had almost accidents in small pyro, particularly even on one of the shows, which everybody remembers, I'm sure, Letterman, where they didn't mark the box and the product inside. Luckily, with enough eyes on it, it was caught. It's very important. And if you're doing any work with the ATF, especially in inventory, the box has to be, if the number's got to be crossed off, if you take anything out of there, it must be initialed, dated, and nothing goes in a box, a different type of box. If that's the product the box came in, that's a box that goes back in, and a running log of what's left in that box must be kept. Not only in an inventory, but also on the box itself. All right, this is important too. If you don't have the proper equipment, very important. So display site inspection. Review the permit application and the site plan. Confirm and brief all required fire personnel. We always have what we call a toolbox talk prior to anything we do. We go over every little detail, make sure everybody's on the same page, knows their job and their positions. The items you need when you do the inspection, if you are a regulator, and even the people doing the show should have this, because we should show up as a regulator, and it should be done prior to us getting there. We shouldn't have to do it ourselves. But inevitably, a lot of times we end up doing it. One is a tape measure. Obviously, you're going to measure mortar tubes. You want to measure height, diameter, the rack systems. Rangefinder, great tool, always comes in handy. You want to know, don't take anyone's word for anything. That's a common mistake people made. They'll tell you it's 25 feet. Always check the numbers yourself. The weather meter, or anemometer is a very important tool because that'll tell you wind speed, wind direction, and you can make any adjustments. Now, typically, we're going to go into this later on, but I will mention it now, and I'll mention it later, is that any sustained wind speed, you know, it could be 20 miles an hour, but the number's usually 30 miles an hour. There's 30 miles an hour, and that's the same thing for cranes in construction. The show does not go off. Cranes stop operating. That's usually the numbers, 30 miles per hour. Then we got flashlight, ground marking paint. Ground marking paint is used to make sure they're putting their racks in the right spot. It's also used as a tool if you find something that is damaged or needs to be taken out of service. We will mark it so it doesn't come back again. And proper PPE. A lot of people, even regulatory aides, they ask the pyro team they're overseeing to wear it, and they're not wearing it. Very important, proper PPE. Have to have all approved paperwork, an inspection checklist. It has to be checked off. Proper PPE, you got to know what to wear. So, in other words, if you're wearing, you have to wear mostly cotton clothing, a tight weave, which is less flammable than a loose weave, and you could obviously wear some of the aramids or other types of flame-resistant material. An example of an aramid would be Kevlar or Nomex. So there are options, but it's always long sleeve, whether you're doing high explosives or anything on a range. Long sleeve. We'll go into some other stuff later on. Then we're going to go into the way we do escorts here. If you look at our escort form, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. You could read it, but this was instituted. This particular escort form goes to every agency, from every agency of NYPD to the FBI to the Secret Service, our people, our engine companies. We could tell you at any particular time where that truck is headed, what's on it, and that's very important because net explosives weight and what is on there has a major contributing factor to evacuation distances, shelter-in-place distances, and your reaction. Main thing with reaction is when you do react to something, sit back, think about it, and don't just rush into something. Transporting vehicles. All right, transportation. One shall be able to carry the load without difficulty, gross vehicle weight within the manufacturer's GVW, good mechanical condition, and shall be equipped with the proper two fire extinguishers, combined rating of a 2A, 10 BC, which is a CO2. And the reason we use CO2 is one is chemical sometimes will do more damage to the human body than the fire itself. CO2 is used to put out when somebody is on fire so you don't do any damage to them. Also, a first aid kit's always good, not necessary, but it's not required. All right, and then you got your placards, which you got to mark on the proper sides of the truck and the rear of the truck. You have to have your proper paperwork, which is very important, hazmat, with whatever endorsement you need. So you need a commercial driver's license with proper endorsements, whatever it is. If it's a hazmat endorsement, it depends on what you're carrying. And you always keep your paperwork. We sometimes have problems where people put it on their phone. That's not good enough. It's got to be with you in your vehicle, in your manifest. And the vehicle's got to be inspected and properly permitted. Then when transporting, cargo area, tight floors, very important. All exposed potentially spark-producing metal shall be covered with a non-sparking material. So there's no metal beds. A lot of fireworks accidents happen. There was one in Hawaii and recently one in New Mexico. If you slide that box across and there's any spillage or any kind of dust from the fireworks, it's going to go because you got what you call either static electricity, which a human body could even produce enough to set off a charge. So there's certain, in high explosives, one way to ground yourself is either go down on one knee or to shake somebody's hand when you hand them something that's explosive. So open body vehicles, which would be a pickup truck, if you're carrying any product on the beach that you load your boxes or a land show, the boxes cannot go over the bed of the pickup and they must be covered with a flame-resistant tarp. Transporting vehicles, no person shall smoke, carry matches, or other flame-producing device, firearms, or loaded cartridge while in 50 feet of the vehicle. The exception to that is the law enforcement officers acting in the performance of their duties. And I will say nobody, doesn't matter who they are, and this is in any accidents that the main reason is that there are accidents is one is lack of training, lack of retraining. Just because you did something 20 years ago doesn't mean you still remember it. The other thing is almost all the accidents that happen, is that somebody shouldn't have been in the area that didn't need to be in that area. Doesn't matter who it is. In New York, we give the blasters, we give them total control on a commercial blasting site. As far as keeping people off, they say no, it's no. Obviously, we have the ultimate authority, but we keep every unnecessary personnel away from whether it's a blast site, a fireworks show. Inevitably, the people who get hurt are the people that didn't even need to be there in the first place. So we're going to the no vehicle parking. No vehicles shall be parked before reaching its destination. That means rule of explosives. You get to your destination as quickly as possible with a minimal amounts of stops and the most direct route. So like in New York City, we have certain bridges they can only go over. You never go, any lower level of bridge is considered a tunnel. Upper level, we have the Throgs Neck, we have the George Washington, and the Goethals. That is it without special permission. The vehicle should never be unattended, which you got to teach the drivers. I've seen it happen. Just get out of the vehicle and ask somebody to watch it. Just do things that are very dangerous. Obviously, shall not be parked within 300 feet of open fire. And safe havens are an area where if you need to keep the product overnight and hasn't arrived at its destination, obviously security, etc. Security shouldn't be, it's I believe 75 feet away minimum from a building. And obviously you don't want to park by schools, things of that nature. So you could look at NFPA 498. It tells you what safe haven is considered. Box transportation, you got if you look at a picture of the van and the truck, that is no good. Must be neat. Usually it should be towards the front of the cab, and then you would have your rack systems and everything. So when you unload, you get the racks out first. So, and it's got to be secure. So once you put your product in the front, you stack it neatly and brace it, and make sure it's barricaded and braced. Smoking materials 50 feet away. We don't have that problem usually because you can't smoke anywhere in New York City anyhow. So that's kind of, we don't usually have that problem that much anymore. Mortar tubes, we'll go right into the products. Mortar tubes, installation of mortar tubes shall be inspected for dents, bent ends, cracked broken plugs, any scale. One is the wall thickness must not be deteriorated. That's one. It is like the rifle of a gun. If it is deteriorated, that mortar will come out, or that shell will come out at the angle it's not intended to come out, and bring it much closer to the audience. If you look at the next picture with the broken, chipped, no good. Same thing. If you know ballistics, anything comes out like that, it is not going the way it's supposed to go. Next one. This is important too, as far as inspection of the mortar tubes. Got to be clear of the debris. That does not mean you turn it over and just bang it on the ground and assume it's out. If those wrappers get wet, you could potentially, one could stick right on top of the other. So what you must do is, one, is look at it with a flashlight, make sure nothing's in there, obviously, and any paper that's in there, because I've seen people just bang it on the ground. That doesn't mean you got everything. And the way to check that the shell is all the way down is by using a wooden stick with a mark on it. Wooden sticks, anything. You're never supposed to push a shell into a mortar tube. It's not designed for that. It's only to make sure it's all the way down. Because the height of a mortar tube is specifically designed for the specific shell. Weather, same thing. Gets wet, product's no good. So protect it from the weather. Damp ground, weather-resistant bags, placed under the mortar prior to ground placement. And same thing, plastic on top, tin foil. So bags, traps, plastic sheeting placed on one end. It could be, it depends what it is. You could even put a tarp, and the Macy show will put tarps over it. It doesn't matter as long as it's protected from the weather. Then firing the display. Crowd management. Sometimes you end up being the security. We try not to be, but you may have to do it. So you must position your men at the perimeters and make sure that the crowd control is correct. If it's private security, police department, it could be, it depends. But you're also the backup. You are the eyes and the ears and the backup to any of these parts of the show that need to be addressed. Perimeter monitored and barriers if you need. Caution tape I don't like because usually people walk right under it or go right through it. All right, then we're going to go into the fireworks crew required PPE. Same thing, helmet, OSHA approved. Usually we try to use similar to a firefighter helmet or an EMS helmet, which has the neck protection as well, eye protection, hearing protection, foot protection, gloves. And we talked about this before, cotton, wool, or clothing with similar fire-resistant qualities, which are, like we said, certain types of aramids, Nomex, Kevlar. Tight weaves are better than loose weaves because you have more air and it'll be more flammable if it's a loose weave, even if it's cotton. Electronic firing, there's no time delay for using electronically fired consumer cake or display cake. All portions of firing systems, from power supply to E-match, you've got to inspect them. There's no breaks. You got to be careful. We don't allow any hand firing, but some states do. Firing units shall be off and secured at all times. That means the key's out of it. And no one in the area when testing status or continuity, which means if they're going to run a current, it's usually 50 milliamps or 0.05 amps, and that's the maximum. It's got to be a specific device. You can't just use anything. It's got, like for blasting, it's a blaster's galvanometer. So anybody, when they're testing status, still a small potential, it could fire. So you need to be out of the area, and the area needs to be clear. High wind, precipitation, and adverse weather. Again, that's why you have the wind meter and anemometer, and to measure the wind speed, direction. Rain and snow, electrical storm. Obviously, any stray voltage will set off an electric system. We talked about displays not being held when the wind velocity exceeds 30 miles an hour. 20 miles an hour sustained. 30 miles an hour could be gusts. Operators shall have available again, we've already talked about that. Any display shall be stopped immediately in the event that the upper wind conditions cause the fallout to change and possess a threat to safety of public or property. So the wind, speed, direction is going to affect your show. And we usually, that's when you can angle your mortar tubes. If it's a beach show and the wind's blowing out towards the audience who's on the boardwalk, you can angle them into the ocean. That's the only time. We don't do it for aesthetic effects, only if it's necessary to adjust for the wind direction. Post-display, cool down. Everybody's different. You got to use your head. We have a minimum cool down of 20 minutes. That would be for a fireworks show. Pyro's a little bit different if it's inside a stadium. Very important. Then the personnel that go out there, nobody needs to go out there but the pyros originally, and check for any unfired product and then make the decision. We leave it up to them because it is safe both ways, whether they want to fire it or package it up. We don't necessarily make them package it up and take it back. If they want to fire it, because usually that's safer than repackaging it, that's their choice, unless we feel there is something that's dangerous. All electronic fire equipment powered off. Like I said, we take the key out. Inspection and sight of all mortars must be conducted by a knowledgeable person. No public access. No chances, no public access, and daylight. Nothing happens with explosives. Okay, it's dusk to dawn, and we never let them do anything in the dark, whether it's a blasting job or a fireworks show. All right, well, it's got to be loaded prior to dark. It could obviously be fired when it's dark, and if it's boxed up, and then you got to conduct a search in the morning for any unspent shells. So the company is required to come back. The pyros are required to come back in the morning and inspect and make sure there is no product left over, whether it's a barge or a land display. All right, we'll go to post-display. unfired devices. All right, fired in accordance with code, which means function as designed. You could fire it. Removed and repackaged, which you got to be careful because you don't want to pull on the fuses because you could have what we call a snap and shoot. There's a string on those shells that are designed to lower it down. If that's not there and you pull it out by the fuse, you could potentially set it off. It's happened in high explosives with a cap. And don't believe anybody. People said it'll never happen. Believe me, it happens. You just don't hear about it. It may only happen once every 20 years. And a record of all failures to fire. We do a full investigation on why the product fails, so we make sure it doesn't happen again. And obviously when things go wrong, we've had a lot of accidents this year. You've seen people don't think a gun can set off fireworks, but they can. We've had it happen, as you see on the news, the truck. There was also a fireworks store that somebody tripped and a shotgun shell went through the side of the building, and the fireworks store went up in flames. And you can see the videos if you reference some of the videos. And, I mean, I was in construction, and I did this stuff, and I've seen the accidents. It's a lot more, has a tremendous impact when you actually see it. I've seen this common mistakes. Just go do that. You'll be there for a second. Taking the poor man's way of doing it instead of spending an extra $100 or rushing something. For example, somebody used dead cord with a nylon rope, which is a no-no because a nylon rope produces static electricity, and they tried to do it the cheap method, didn't do it correctly, and they were injured severely. Now, if you look at the Macy show on the next slide, we have, that's one of the barges. You have 4 barges, usually approximately 300 feet. Obviously, as you can see, everybody's wearing their equipment. The picture, those are the barges. You'll see the one large used barge in the center of the frame. You see the pyros, the racks correctly, double nailed, 2 boards, everything done. You can't really, it's not a very clear picture, but you could see it. If you look at the one to the left, the bottom left, that is actually the Brooklyn Bridge. That is one of the towers. The only access up there is to climb it, which I did myself. That's one thing. If you're in charge of the show, you must see it visually. Don't rely on anyone else's words for it. You're in charge. You're responsible. Make sure it's right. But that is the tower on the Brooklyn Bridge. You can see there's some cakes up there, some comets. If you look in the background with the gentleman with the red hard hat on. Now, just to give you a quick overview of the Macy show, Macy's is a large undertaking. It is a joint effort between the main players on the bridge. Obviously, we work with the mayor's office, but we have an Office of Emergency Management. ESU, Emergency Services Unit, Police Department, and the DOT, Department of Transportation, are the main players on the bridge because it's 2 weeks' worth of work. Taking lanes, loading the bridge, loading the towers, underneath on travelers, under the bridge, on the railings. So it is a big undertaking. And you have a tremendous amount of security. Obviously, you want to make sure that everything is secure. So the bridge, that's our main partners on the bridge, ESU, DOT, that's Emergency Service Unit, Department of Transportation, Mayor's Office, obviously Macy's too. If you go to the pier that they load at, again, PD presence, private security presence, NYPD Aviation, NYPD Harbor, scuba divers, sweeping the barges to make sure there is, because obviously the most credible threat would be at a high-level event where there's a large crowd. You have the drone issues nowadays. You have several different issues. So that whole area is locked down under complete scrutiny. We also have our marine units there, our engine companies there. But basically that show from soup to nuts, the planning stage will start now for next year. Many, many meetings, and the actual loading takes place over at least a 2-week period. So it is a tremendous undertaking. Normally, device-wise, anywhere from 75,000 to 100,000, which is larger than some states' entire shows put together. But I just stress the most important thing is anybody, always be safe out there. Make sure you got each other's backs. and don't do anything you're not comfortable doing. Call the experts in. Right? Anything in the hands of the professionals is safe. It's when people get their hands on this stuff that have no idea what they're doing, and they tell me the same thing. My neighbor got injured. He's like, I've been doing this 14 years. I'm like, well, 15 wasn't good for him. All right? So please always call the experts. Any questions? And I really appreciate everybody for your time. I like to talk a lot because I'm from New York. And I'm glad I was able to squeeze it in the allotted time. And please feel free to call if you guys have any questions. So,
if you guys have any questions, you can submit them in the box on the left-hand side. Mara, yes, the slides will be available via email. There will also be a recording of this presentation available in the next couple of days, available on the Region 2 website.
okay. Do you want me to answer some of these questions, or?
I think while we wait to see if anybody submits any, one question I have.
I don't see any yet.
Yeah. What do you see as the most common either violation or dangerous practice from folks that are handling these pyrotechnics?
The two most dangerous practices, one is stockpiling, which we never allow. When we load a show, you're allowed to take one box out, load it, and as you're pretty much done, bring another box. What happens in the accidents in fireworks, people, especially since some of the states have legalized reloadable mortars, which are much more potent than a typical fireworks cake, and what they do at their house, and this has happened, is they put all the nice consumer grade products they bought and stick it on the corner of their porch with their family on the porch. Then they shoot the show off, and if one of those embers comes back in that pile, that whole pile will deflagrate. And there's been some killed members of this family killed, houses burnt down. The other biggest problem is disposal of the product. So people not using the product correctly and not disposing of it correctly. A lot of times you never hear of the accidents because nobody got killed and it wasn't in your state. But believe me, and it's a lot of states where it's legal, you can buy fireworks legally, there are a vast amount of accidents. So you got to be real careful and don't take it for granted. But those are usually the main ones with using the device as it was not designed to be used, stockpiling in one area at your house, and also, I said, disposing of it.
Thank you. I have a question as well. So the Macy's 4th of July Spectacular, that just got moved back to the Brooklyn Bridge. Previously, it was on barges further up on the East River. How does the location of setting these off get decided each year?
Well, typically Macy's, the way that process works, Macy's likes for design purposes and to change it up, they will determine what location they would like. Then it is a collective effort between several agencies, from the PD to the explosives unit to the mayor's office, to look at that area, make sure it is safe and doable. The first decision is going to be made by the mayor's office because nothing can be done without them. If they approve the location, then we work diligently as partners to make this job safe and make it happen. And Macy's typically will do anywhere from 5 to 8 years, 9 years on one side. They've done it on the east side. The last probably been 7, 8 years maybe now. And sometimes we'll move it to the west side because there cannot be any other fireworks shows because New York City has jurisdiction over the river all the way to the Jersey high water mark. That's why we won't see a barge show other than a New York City approved show. So Macy's really designs it. They mix it up, and then it's a matter of the agencies coming together and working as a collective and coordinating everything. But luckily here in the city, we do have a great relationship, and we all work together hand in hand to make these things happen and make them safe.
Great. Thank you.
So you may not bridge for 6 years.
Thank you so much for that. So if there aren't any other questions, which you can submit, we are going to end it here. If you guys
Actually, Chair, it looks like there is one question. Sir, would you mind if the slides are shared when we post the recording and the transcript, or is any information in these slides proprietary that shouldn't be shared?
No, it's fine. This is not, yeah, go ahead.
The slides will be shared out, yes. All right, and just a quick reminder, if anyone is interested in signing up for our Region 2 Preparedness Bulletin, that comes out bi-weekly, and it has a bunch of great information on preparedness, events, activities, tips, and it lists all upcoming webinars that we do every single month and when previous webinar recordings go live on our website. So if you want to sign up for that, you can do that on the box in the top right. Other than that, Chief Meyers, thank you so much for that presentation. It was incredibly educational and definitely learned a lot. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I'm glad I could help out and keep things safe.
All right. And with that, the time is 1:52. Thank you so much for attending today.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend. Okay. Very good.